I'm going to turn this old muddy wood into a beautiful bespoke built-in desk because I'm running low on money. And I'm going to put it in here. Now, I don't actually want or need a new desk. In fact, it's more about the storage. I'm going to put some storage underneath. I'm going to have some display areas with some more storage in. So I'm hoping the desk is just going to make it look nicer, and I can put some lamps and things on there that are fun to make too. Now I'm also going to put some sliding, moving storage in there, some secret compartments, and it's going to look awesome. Now I like the idea of having a desk in the office that I didn't have to worry about damaging, so I wasn't too worried what this one turned out like. Until I started to really like it. But going into this project, I just wanted to keep things quick and easy and cheap. Because, well, I like free things. So all I've done is sanded down the edges of the grimy boards, glued them up, and then clamped them together. I left them for about an hour and decided to screw a batten of leftover wood on the bottom for some secondary support. Now I know I could have done this better by using biscuits, but as I said, I just wanted to keep this quick and easy. And where the boards are all warped and out of line, I'm going to have to sand this down with some 40 grit sandpaper. Now, if I had the space and the money, I would use a planer and a joiner and get this done properly. But as you can see, at the moment I don't have that luxury, so I'm doing my best with what I have and doing this with the sander in the back garden. So another downside of using reclaimed wood is that sometimes you come across metal in it. I find if you get some mole grips, you can often twist it out. This was not one of those times. As I wasn't too worried about the table, I decided I'd just leave it in there and sand it down later. I also had some wood filler lying around, so I decided to mix it up. Now the instructions said not to put the filler into any gaps between the boards. So I decided to put it in the gap between the boards, because after all, I'm not worried about how this table turns out. And for that reason, I decided to experiment a bit. I used some colour pigment intended for epoxy resin and stirred it into the wood hardener. I actually ended up using way more than I thought I would need. And it still wasn't that green. It turned out to be an expensive way to do it. If I want to do the same thing again, next time I'll just try some food colouring. Now in my office I want a natural looking theme. So a piece of live edge wood would have been ideal. But again, where I didn't have the budget, I decided to try to make the scaffold boards look live edged. And because, well, I don't care how this table turns out, I decided to carve into it. I used my Mampa cutting disc to carve chunks off of the edge, and then I went over with a wire brush in a drill and I used this along the grain. This will make the edge very rough, but it will also pick out the grain to a degree and make the wood look a little bit weathered and a little bit natural. After that, I just went over with a sander. It will smooth over the outer bit, but where it goes a bit deeper, it will still leave these rough. Next, I decided to sand off the wood filler and see what it looked like where the green wood filler was. You can't really tell that it's that green. So that was time well spent. Now, where I don't have a workshop and a table saw, I decided to screw in a piece of wood as a guide and use my circular saw to trim the edges of the wood. You still get a really nice finish doing it this way. And if you have a corner when you get to the end, I find a good way to finish this off is with a jigsaw or a multi-tool. Now before I try finishing it and making it look nice, I'm just going to make sure it fits in place. It kind of fits, there is a bit of a gap, so I'm going to trim along the back and close that gap in. I also don't like this bit very much, so I'm going to cut the end off and then carve into this area to give it a bit of interest. This is me carving into here, although the footage isn't very interesting. I also decided that if this were live edge, it wouldn't be so curved. So I carved in to make the end look a bit flatter and then put some more details back in. And if you have a good memory, you can probably remember back to about 15 seconds ago when I recorded the dodgy footage. This is a bit I carved out to give a bit more interest to the end of the table, and I really want it to look more weathered. So I've got a pair of old pliers and I'm pulling chunks of wood off. I've drilled some holes in, which I hope to make it look like woodworm, and again I've used the wire brush just to add in some scratches, just to make it look like it suffered some real wear and tear. So to really make it fit in with the room, I'm going to have to put a beetle on there. Now to do this, I'm going to use my laser cutter, and I've used a design with the help of AI. And I've made this little beetle here. I made up my own code and put a date on so I can remember exactly when I set lights in my office, building my fossil desk. I also put a little flame symbol by its head, and this is going to go just above where the fire started. And here I'm checking to make sure the table is level. I also added on this fossilized leaf I made. I liked it before but didn't use it. So the reason I'm checking that the table is level is because I'm going to use epoxy to fill in the hole. Originally I wanted to use the green wood filler from before, but as it didn't turn out dark enough, I decided to give this a go. And it was about this point where I started to realise I was beginning to care about what the table looked like. Every time I personalised it and added a bit more, I became that much more attached to it. So from this point on, I really wanted it to look amazing. Having said that, I still wanted to experiment, so I've dropped a few drops of green pigment in and I'm washing it around with a cocktail stick. Because it ended up so dark you can't actually see it, perhaps I should have used the orange instead. I very quickly went over with a blowtorch to help get the bubbles out. And then the next morning I thought it might be cool to put some cogs inside the resin, but it had already dried. And I noticed there was a bit of resin missing from the leg. It looked like the resin had escaped through a screw hole and dropped onto the floor. Luckily I still had the cardboard down, which protected the floor. So I put some more resin in, but it wasn't deep enough that I could put the cogs in. And that's when I came up with my next idea, because whenever you're using reclaimed wood, you'll get surprises, whether it's leaky screw holes or some surprisingly well hidden metal in the wood. When I was cutting this desk, some sparks started flying out and I realised I'd gone through a screw and pretty much cut it in half. So, me being as strange as I am, I don't just like throwing things like this away. I decided to burn another beetle into the table close to where the screw was from, put the screw in it and fill it with epoxy and put some cogs in there. It is worth mentioning that I held the cogs in place with superglue before I poured the epoxy in. I really love this little feature, but now it's time to ruin it. I really hate doing this bit, but it's completely necessary. See, I need to get the epoxy from around the beetle off the table, so you need to sand it down. I'm using a 40 grit to do this. Okay, so now I'm aware this looks terrible, but it has got rid of all the resin I didn't want. So what I'm going to do now is go through the sanding discs and get this nice and smooth. Should take a few hours or so. And this is when I found the hole made by the bubble in the resin. And that's no good, because I really like this table. Luckily, this is an easy fix with 2 parts superglue. Just put the glue in the holes and then spray it with the activator. And it's also reassuring that you can see the cogs through it when the activator's still wet. Now it's just a case of sanding from 40 grit all the way up to 3000 and you get this nice clean finish. And to finish the table off, I decided to go with the Ronseal medium oak stain. All the reviews online said it was a bit orangey and I did want a slight orange tint to the desk. But it looked awful. It was almost luminous orange. It's the kind of thing you'll see around your granddad's house when he's got some cheap builder in to paint the banisters. It just looks so unnatural, I was absolutely devastated. And the worst bit is, where I'd done the live edge wood and put some deep gouges in, there is no way I was realistically going to sand this out of the wood. But this was no longer a project I didn't care about. I knew this project had huge potential, so I decided to sand it down as much as I could. And that's when I knocked the wood and one of the planks became completely loose. My rushing to get the job finished, where I didn't secure the wood together properly and then not check the stain before I put it on, had set me back massively, and in fact at this point I decided to give up and start from scratch. But on this channel we don't ask ourselves if we can, we ask ourselves how we can. Now the solution to reattaching the plank was pretty simple. But I just felt defeated at this point. When we have expectations of ourselves and expectations of what we want, it's really difficult when things don't go as planned to stay on track. And when you combine that with the fact that the stain had gone horribly wrong as well, emotionally it was a hard obstacle to overcome. But after a few hours break, I decided to give it another go. It did in the end set me back 2 days, but I sanded it to where I needed it and I put on another medium oak stain. This time I used Little Fair's wood stain and it looks so much better. It really makes it look like an expensive piece of wood, as opposed to the cheap banisters. On the edge of the table where I wanted the live edge effect, you can still see the orange stain. Now actually I quite like the variance in colour, and I ended up putting more stain on the edge to make it darker, and then sanding it back, and then putting more stain on and sanding it back. And I kept repeating this until I got an effect that I like. I believe it looks a lot more natural now. I also decided to do something you should never do, and sand down the stain whilst it was still wet. And again, I really liked the way this looked. Obviously it's not as good as actually having live edge wood, but it's probably saved me several £100s. I finished it off with one coat of Danish oil just to give it some slight protection from water. Okay, so here's the desk so far. I've finished with the top now. I just need to get all the storage done. Now I don't know exactly what I'm going to do for storage yet. I'm certainly going to have some moving bits and maybe some spinning stuff and some secret compartments. There's a lot of space underneath as well. I might just do a curtain here. I'm not 100% sure. But overall, I'm extremely happy with this desk. There's a little bit here where I can see a bit of metal from a screw, which I'm not too sure about. But I've managed to use a design that I've been wanting to use for a long time. I've got a little beetle to commemorate the fire of August 24. And I've got the other clockwork beetle to subtly display the screw I found in the table. And I'm really happy with the fake live edge. This is something I'm going to look into in more detail in the future. So if you want to see how this desk finally turns out, hit that subscribe button and you'll know as soon as it comes out. And if you've got any projects that you want to do, why not give them a go? They may turn out better than you expected.